On Thursday morning, 21st September 2023, I received intel from my little birds that some YouTuber I never even heard of plans to make a response video to one of my older videos. I checked the guy out, and on his Patreon I saw the first 30 seconds of it.
Hello there. This video is about self-proclaimed Daenerys Targaryen extremist Phoenix Ashes, in particular a video they did titled Hills Alive has no idea what she's talking about and is lying all the time. And some of you complained the title of my video, the 163 for Dummies, was too aggressive. For some context, Phoenix Ashes is an A Song of Ice and Fire fan,
which prompted me to investigate his entire account. I like to be prepared. I found some interesting things and connected them to some other interesting things. First, I watched some of his videos and I was not impressed, but you know me. I'm difficult to impress and my standards are exceptionally high. So I'm not into Reddit theories I've heard about a million times presented as some new, original idea. Usually even the wording of these theories is the same, so why bother? What did surprise me was that he chose to respond to this video of all videos and not perhaps the Who Will Burn King's Landing in the books. Or rather, Kevin did respond to that video about King's Landing and many other of my videos in that particular production of his, but he never mentioned me by name, nor did he give credit to me. But it's not difficult to read between the lines. This video is most certainly directed towards me specifically. I posted this video on 16th June of 2023. There I make arguments as to why I believe that the burning of King's Landing will be the work of Jon Con or Cersei. On 22nd of July 2023, Kevin Pendragon posted a video where he addresses that very assertion, arguing to the contrary. Perhaps Jon has a chance of redemption. He learns that Rhaegar's son Aegon survived the sack of King's Landing and he was tasked to take him under his wing and nurture him so that one day the boy might regain his rightful legacy. He promises himself that this time he shall stop at nothing to ensure it. I failed the father, he said, but I will not fail the son. It is fair to assume that the bells shall ring in the books as well. And if Jon Connington is there, what will be his reaction to the sound that represents everything that was taken away from him? Given how bitterly he regrets not putting down Stony Sep to torch, could it be that he will not want to repeat that mistake in King's Landing?
So if Jon Con has this past trauma, and there might come another day when the bells ring in battle, could that set him off to do something horrible? Would he today be willing to accept the title of Butcher? And we also have to consider he is in charge of keeping young Griff, who claims to be Aegon Targaryen, alive. Which means Jon Con has one last chance, one route for redemption. If killing a city full of innocents means putting Rhaegar's son, his beloved Silver Prince, if doing that puts his son on the Iron Throne, or at least secures a victory for him, would Jon Con be willing to do that?
This entire storyline was omitted from the show. The sound of the bells was a trigger for Daenerys, even though she never had any negative connotations related to it. If anything, Dany should have positive thoughts regarding bells, since the Dothraki wear little bells in their hair as a symbol of victory, though that aspect was omitted from the show as well. The sound of the bells ringing is a thing very specific to Jon, but rather than omit it altogether due to his absence from the show, it was given to Daenerys. If Chekhov's bells were included in spite of Jon's omission from the show, they must be an important plot point.
But then the city falls to Daenerys' forces, and Jon Con once again hears the bells. Not the bells in the towers signaling defeat, but the bells in the braids of the Dothraki. I think because the show left that part out of Dothraki culture, that for every battle a Dothraki warrior wins, they put a bell in their braid, they had to make some major changes if they wanted to still have this moment.
Question is, who will be ringing the bells in King's Landing when Jon Con hears them and snaps? The most likely candidate seems to be Cersei. Varys kills her uncle Kevan in the epilogue of A Dance with Dragons, so that Cersei fills the power vacuum and continues the instability in King's Landing. Chaos is a ladder, if you will. Cersei is not the type of person to surrender to whoever will attack the city. And it just so happens that like every Targaryen, Cersei has a particular devotion to wildfire and is compared to the man numerous times. This sight had filled him with disquiet, reminding him of Aerys Targaryen and the way a burning would arouse him. Let all of King's Landing see the flames. It will be a lesson to our enemies. Now you sound like Aerys.
Cersei in the books has already destroyed a part of the Red Keep using wildfire. In that case, it was the Tower of the Hand of the King. Cersei in the books shares many parallels with Mad King Aerys. They both clearly enjoy wildfire. Even Jaime tells Cersei to her face, "Now you sound like Aerys." The night she burns the tower, Jaime watches her and you can kind of feel he's thinking in his brain, "Oh, here we go again."
Jaime Lannister, in an ironic twist of fate, is revered for his most heroic act. He killed Aerys to prevent him from carrying out his plans to burn King's Landing with wildfire. Could it be that history is about to repeat and Jaime will have to stop Cersei from a similar act, only this time it will be too late? As a young girl, Cersei had a prophecy about a Valonqar killing her. This word translates to little brother in Valyrian, and Cersei always assumed that it refers to Tyrion. But Jaime is in fact several minutes younger than Cersei. He too could be the Valonqar.
Will the Kingslayer become the Queenslayer as well? You know, if you're playing the Game of Thrones, you gotta unlock both achievements. And by killing Cersei, will he fulfill the Valonqar prophecy?
He mentions the bells, he mentions Cersei's parallels to Aerys, and all that, only to put it aside and argue that it just has to be Dany because he thinks it would fit.
Jon Con might be an older man now, a battle-hardened sellsword, but he's still no butcher. The bells will break him, they will not embolden him. And Cersei, she loves King's Landing too much to want to destroy it. I think in her end, she will wish she destroyed King's Landing, but in that moment, she won't be in the position of power to make that happen. In the end, it's going to be Daenerys if anyone destroys the city, and it won't be by accident.
No other argument, just that. In the process, he disregards Cersei's and Jon Con's characterizations, and, as these theories tend to do, diminishes their characters to just they exist. So essentially he has everything to reach proper conclusions, but he throws it out of the window for his preferred theory, and his argument is, I personally find it underwhelming for it to be Jon Con or Cersei, so it's gonna be Dany because I want it to be Dany. Literally. Sorry, but you wanting something to happen completely blinded you. You have all these dots, just connect them.
I've seen it said that when Daenerys finally attacks the city, she will accidentally set off the caches of wildfire and destroy the city in the process. This means Daenerys does destroy King's Landing, but it was an accident. It will be her choice. She will be the one who decides to do that. Daenerys Targaryen will destroy King's Landing. I feel like for those that push the idea that Daenerys will destroy the city by accident, you people are afraid. You're afraid of having these characters do dark and disturbing deeds. There is a limit to your imagination and to your level of storytelling. If you put people like that in charge of telling this story, we would not have events like Ned Stark's death or the Red Wedding. People like that, people who are afraid, people who lack daring. People like that, they are too scared of pushing the envelope. If they were in charge of telling an original story, you would not read that story and think to yourself, wow, that was a new and unique experience. These people, it seems like they lack the ability to see what's never been done before.
Kevin compares Dany burning King's Landing to the Red Wedding and Ned's execution and points his little finger at people who don't want it to be Dany because they don't want to see Dany engage in bad deeds. But at the same time, he already considers her devil incarnate, so... He also forgets one crucial thing though. Few people saw the Red Wedding and Ned's execution coming, while Dany burns King's Landing for no reason is one of the most popular predictions for the Winds of Winter. None of this would be a unique experience either, as we've seen thousands of shrieking harpies corrupted by power and in need to be put down by good, righteous men.
Save me. I love you.
We've also seen thousands of people with progressive causes that suddenly snap and become war criminals so that the audience does not root for them or their cause.
I'm standing in your house, serving justice to a man who stole your vibranium and murdered your people.
None of this is subversive or interesting. Kevin not only believes that it would be, he also thinks it would be compelling and interesting to have the two only women in power in this story turn into mad hysterical bitches, and both of them should have the same ending.
So one final thing, in the beginning of the video, I talked about the Mad Queen Daenerys theory. I know a lot of people out there, when it comes to Cersei and Aerys, they believe she is going to be the Mad Queen, and to have Daenerys fill a similar role would be redundant.
Also something I pointed out. It's very telling that they want the only queen regents holding power in their own right to have the exact same arcs and the exact same conclusions to these arcs. Cersei, killed by her intimate partner to save the world from her tyranny. Dany, also killed by her intimate partner to save the world from her tyranny. It's a pattern, an uncompelling one at that, because what is compelling about two characters having the same exact endings, especially if they are women? He also noted that Cersei and Dany are meant to be false.
When Martin first envisioned the fourth book, he wanted Cersei and Daenerys' rules to be compared and contrasted. There's an idea that Daenerys and Cersei are foils of one another. But this has been taken so far by people who do not know what the word foil means in this context. They've taken it to mean Dany is the anti-Cersei. Dany is everything Cersei is not.
Wait a second. All of these things are claims that I made in my videos. A Feast for Crows and A Dance with Dragons, respectively the fourth and the fifth book in the A Song of Ice and Fire franchise, were originally supposed to be one book. It had to be split into two due to its length, and one thing that George R.R. Martin regrets about it is that he could not contrast the characters of Cersei Lannister and Daenerys Targaryen directly. This might come as a surprise, since way too often Daenerys and Cersei are treated as if they are the same. Two crazy, tyrannical, paranoid mad queens obsessed with fire and ready to slaughter everyone who does not worship the ground they walk on. Most also predict them to have identical endings, both going crazy with power and killed by their heroic, righteous, intimate partners to save the world from their tyranny. Yet these words by George R.R. Martin prove that Daenerys and Cersei are not and have never been identical characters. In fact, they are meant to be analyzed as opposites, perfect foils for one another, exploring various ways in which a woman in a world such as the world of Azoyav would hold power. Coincidence? No, it's not a coincidence. This video is very specifically directed towards me, and now I have zero doubt about it because I'm the only person to talk about these things on YouTube specifically. And it just so happens that Kevin cooks a video about me specifically, where I do touch upon this subject. By the time I'm writing this, I haven't yet seen this video, but if the quality of his arguments is as strong as in this one, then I will not have a difficult time winning once more. I mean, Kevin does not seem to know what foil means.
But this has been taken so far by people who do not know what the word foil means in this context. They've taken it to mean Dany is the anti-Cersei. They've taken it to mean Dany is the anti-Cersei.
But it does surprise me how much my videos threatened not one, but two semi-prominent creators at this point. At the moment when I uploaded this video, I had very few subscribers, less than 100. Now I am still a very little channel, while Mr. Kevin here has several thousand subscribers. This video in question has merely 5,600 views. Someone of weaker disposition than me could point out that it's a bit unfair to go after someone that is smaller than them, but you know me. I'm naturally confrontational and I'm not scared of them, as I was not scared when Hills Alive fans attacked me before. When the original video about Hills Alive came out, I knew that she acknowledged it, since very quickly afterwards it was getting mass downvoted and was full of hate comments. Comments that I only very recently hid from this video because I'm not particularly proud of how I responded to some of them in the heat of the moment. Nonetheless, the dust has settled and I was sure that both me and she moved on. I did my thing, she did her thing. But I would lie if I said that I did not check out what she's up to every once in a while, and I noticed interesting things. After the infamous video, Hills Alive stopped making videos about Dany altogether. Sure, she would still talk about Targaryens and House of the Dragon, but Dany was gone from her thumbnails and video titles. Her last video about Dani was posted on 13th December 2022. My video was posted on 22nd of January 2023. And after that, Hills Life has not made a Dani focused video. Sure, maybe she mentioned Dani here and there, I don't know, but I don't think it's a coincidence either.
Prologue.
You know, there actually is a character who, by the author himself, to be an unreliable narrator, and that is Sansa Stark. And I know this because I don't have to make up things George R.R. Martin said in order to further my agenda. The Lion's Paw, Lion's Tooth business, on the other hand, is intentional. A small touch of the unreliable narrator. I was trying to establish that the memories of my viewpoint characters are not infallible. Sansa is simply remembering it wrong.
If you look at the quoted passage, you will see it says, "My viewpoint characters are not infallible," plural. Martin is saying all of his characters can be unreliable narrators. And if you were really paying attention, you would have noticed there's a mistake here. It was not Sansa that misremembered the name of Joffrey's sword. It was Arya. Viewpoint characters. Sansa isn't the only one. Phoenix Ashes, you just read it. What are you doing?
But there is a big problem with something called functional illiteracy.
Wait a minute. How did this happen? We're smarter than this.
Apparently not.
The very first seconds of his video already told me what I can expect of it. It's going to be nitpicking words and expressions in order to make me seem unreliable or lying. Yes, Martin says all of his POVs are unreliable, but he specifically singles out Sansa, so yes, he calls her unreliable. And that it was Arya who misremembered the name of the sword is irrelevant. It's George's mistake and not mine. I mentioned Sansa because it's Dani who is most often called an unreliable narrator, probably more so than any other character in A Song of Ice and Fire. Still, George very explicitly highlights Sansa out as an unreliable narrator among his other viewpoints, and not Dani, as some people like to believe. This passage itself is what gave prominence to the unreliable narrator talking point, and even though it's Sansa who's mentioned here, this argument is always used against Dani. This is within the first minute of the video, so I suppose that this is supposed to be some sort of an attention grabber to my supposed sins as a creator. If so, he chose a very weak one. This is additionally not a very nice move towards me, considering that by my accent alone you could realize that I am not a native English speaker, and I might not have infallible understanding of this passage. Granted, I consider my English to be on a near native level, but it's always going to be near.
In fact, I came across this epic diss track dedicated to Hills while doing research for my own video on the 163. I know she did a similar video covering Daenerys executing the Masters, and I wanted to be sure I didn't cover or copy the same talking points.
Was he making sure of this though? Maybe here, but not in other videos, because I was able to establish a pretty convincing case that he's been indirectly responding to me without any sort of acknowledgement, responding to the very arguments I've been making, down to the passages and the mention of the Tracky bells being omitted from the show. I can already make a clear timeline of events at this point. I posted my video on 16th June, as you remember. Kevin's 163 video was posted on 13th July, and the one about JonCon and Cersei was posted on the 22nd of July. My video about Cersei and Dani was posted on the 5th May, and the one that mentions two Mad Queens feeling redundant on 10th March. The likelihood that he used my arguments but presented them in a negative light to not make it immediately obvious is getting stronger and stronger, and in case his video mysteriously disappears, I have it archived.
She's not combative, she's not snarky, her commentary isn't biting, her videos are actually super chill.
First of all, what sort of argument is this? That if someone is nice but factually wrong, they can't be challenged? that if you state vile things in a calm, chill, respectful manner, you cannot be confronted? And why would I not have the right to express the fact how weird it is to dedicate half of your channel's presence to a character you so clearly despise? Parasocial relationships go both ways, and you can most certainly have a negative parasocial relationship with someone. And if you peeped any random Sansa stan blog, you would see that Hills Alive is far from the only example. Hills Alive could be the chillest creator on the planet, but she would still be spewing incredibly harmful ideas. A video of hers I hadn't watched when I was making the initial video is the lolitafication of some female characters in the series. I assumed that Hills Alive criticized George's pattern of writing romantic relations between adult men and little girls, such as Tyrion and Sansa or Sandor and Sansa, and assume that she is right and that I have no reason to even watch it, since I would 100% agree. But 2 months ago, one of my viewers left an extremely disturbing comment under that very video. Yeah, I remember when one of Hills Alive's videos came up in my recommended, and I watched it, unfortunately. It was the Lolita video, and it was baffling to watch her claim, as one of her points for that video, that Sansa is a creep magnet and we are supposed to condemn the creeps, but Dany is also a creep magnet, and this makes her evil because, unlike Sansa, she has Stockholm Syndrome. Good victim versus bad victim match. It wasn't a very good video, and it was clear she was projecting hard for a lot of it, and didn't provide any quotes, which seems to be her norm. She's also a Billy Hargrove stan and claims that he isn't racist, so I wouldn't trust anything she says regarding that subject, even without her slavery apologia. I don't know who Billy Hargrove is. What I care about in this particular subject is that Hills Alive insists that Dany being a victim of child sexual abuse directly correlates with her becoming a tyrant.
There is obviously a great deal of narrative satisfaction that comes from these many victims being the cause of their abusers' ultimate downfalls. But what is unfortunate is there isn't really any hopeful resolution to the survivor stories. Yes, the people who took advantage of them oftentimes die as a direct result of that. But the damage that's done still has after effects that linger and largely spread that trauma to others. In one of the most obvious examples of this trauma cycle continuing long after an abuser is gone, Daenerys' point of view on her own abuse is profoundly depressing and disturbing. Not only is her marriage to Khal Drogo completely repulsive on its face, but the way that he actually treats her is horrific. And the fact that this all happens to her at such a crucial stage of emotional, physical, and intellectual development is a nightmare. Khal Drogo's abuse is incredibly overt, and the fact that Dany's only source of potential reprieve is to essentially seduce a man who is engaging in violent CSA against her is absolutely horrifying. But it's even more horrifying that Dany ultimately rationalizes this extreme trauma by convincing herself that she's actually in love with Drogo. And depressingly, this is an issue that she clearly never really moves on from, at least not yet. She still romanticizes her relationship with Drogo and believes herself to be in love with him. She is attracted to age-inappropriate, exploitative creeps like Daario Naharis. She rationalizes away the untoward behavior of adult men who try to take advantage of her, like Ser Jorah. And tragically, her incredibly warped perspective on love, intimacy, and everything in between causes her to make some profoundly disturbing statements and decisions, revolving around or related to her early abusive experiences. For instance, the dubious consent of her intimate interactions with Irri seem to fly completely over her head. She is empathetic to assault victims when she sees them, but her solutions to these crimes are at times downright disturbing. The fact that she suggests marrying victims to their assaulters during the sack of the Lazarene seems to very pointedly illustrate her drastically distorted view of sex. And although it's only speculation, I think Dany's extreme abuse is likely the reason why she was so cavalier about the mass murder of anyone ages 12 or older in Astapor. Again, as we see from the more well-adjusted characters in the series, there is a cultural distinction that separates children of that age from anyone older. And again, any reasonable person understands that a 12-year-old is a child. But this choice makes more sense through the eyes of a girl who is barely older than that herself, and who was married off to a full-grown man who also happened to be an abusive rapist at the age of 13. Dani is undeniably responsible for the deaths of many children, but her perception of what children can be subjected to is also deranged because of what was done to her by Viserys and Drogo.
How fucked of a view is this, especially given that she allegedly has a psychology degree and may as well work with victims of abuse? So how chill is this creator if she is allowed to spew rhetoric so appalling in the name of hating a fictional character? And in case that video mysteriously disappears, I have it archived as well.
I don't always agree with her. For example, I think young Griff is fake and she thinks he's real, but her videos come off as well-researched and grounded in reality. I watched the entirety of Phoenix Ash's video, wondering if perhaps I missed something in regards to Hills Alive. I have yet to see her lie on purpose or lie by omission, but perhaps I was wrong. No one is infallible and people make mistakes. By the end of Phoenix Ash's video, I was not at all convinced.
In her earlier videos, Hills Alive would not even bother to quote book passages to support her claims, something that I do religiously, precisely so that I can't be accused of lying. And when she does, she omits key book passages that allow her to take this story out of context to fit her preferred agenda. For example, when Drogo attacks the Lazarine village, Hills Alive shows Dany's thought about how this is a price of war, but not her immediately changing her mind and taking decisive actions to stop the rapes, which changes the meaning of this scene entirely.
She was enslaved and brutally, repeatedly raped as a captive, specifically in service of Dany's quest for the Iron Throne. And that is a price that Dany was actively willing to let others pay for her benefit. As she sees the horror of the sacking around her, she literally thinks to herself, this is war. This is what it looks like. This is the price of the Iron Throne.
Now, you at the very least actually cite the books to back your claims. That is a progress. Except you intentionally leave out whatever may make your claim not hold up. May I remind you, Daenerys is at this point a naive, 14-year-old bridal slave who at first tries to rationalize the violence around her, but as soon as she witnesses too much, she puts an end to it as best as she can in the position that she is in. Like 5 lines later. She wanted to cry, but she told herself that she must be strong. This is war. This is what it looks like. This is the price for the Iron Throne. I've told the Khal he ought to make for Meereen, Ser Jorah said. They will pay a better price than he would get from a slaving caravan. Illyrio writes that they had a plague last year, so the brothers are paying double for healthy young girls and triple for boys under 10. If enough children survive the journey, the god will buy us all the ships we need and hire men to sail them. Behind them, the girl being raped made a heart-rending sound, a long sobbing wail that went on and on and on. Dany's hand clenched hard around the reins, and she turned the Silver's head. Make them stop, she commanded Ser Jorah. Khaleesi, the knight sounded perplexed. You heard my words, she said. Stop them. She spoke to her Khas in the harsh accent of Dothraki. Jogo Quaro, you will aid Ser Jorah. I want no rape. If you are yet to see Hills Alive lie or lie by omission, then you haven't watched my video, or you not only have troubles reading, but also troubles with audiovisual comprehension. This is not a judgment on my part, since I myself often have problems understanding spoken words without subtitles, even in my native language. I already gave an example of lying by omission, presenting an out-of-context thought Dany has, without showing what follows immediately afterwards. I also presented another straight-up lie of hers, that she invoked Maegor right before she walked into the funeral pyre. Even though she does not do that, the only time she ever mentions Maegor's name is when she learns of what happened to Irohe. Hills Alive's argument hinges on this happening precisely before she goes into the pyre, because in her eyes, this is the moment Dany establishes herself as a queen.
Just before Dany brings dragons back into the world, she makes a speech to the followers that she has left. And interestingly, when she's lauding her Targaryen heritage, she mentions that she's the blood of Aegon the Conqueror and Maegor the Cruel. Now, clearly the fact that she's referencing Maegor the Cruel of all people doesn't seem like a great sign of what's to come. But after further consideration, the fact that she mentions Aegon and Maegor and no one else is incredibly strange.
Has Hills Alive lied here? Daenerys does bring up Maegor the Cruel, but in a different situation. She does this when she learns about the fact that Eroe, a Lazaran girl she promised herself to protect, was gang-raped by the Dothraki and then killed by Mago. Dany promises herself that she will avenge Eroe. "It was her fate, Khaleesi," said Aggo. "If I look back, I am lost." "It was a cruel fate," Dany said, "yet not so cruel as Mago's will be. I promise you that, by the old gods and the new, by the Lamb God and the Horse God and every other god that lives. I swear it by the Mother of Mountains and the Womb of the World. Before I am done with them, Mago and Kojako will plead for the mercy they showed Eroe." The Dothraki exchanged uncertain glances. "Khaleesi," the handmaid Iri explained, as if to a child. "Jacko is a Khal now, with 20,000 riders at his back." She lifted her head. "And I am Daenerys Stormborn, Daenerys of House Targaryen, of the blood of Aegon the Conqueror and Maegor the Cruel, and old Valyria before them. I am the dragon's daughter, and I swear to you, these men will die screaming." She invokes Maegor and his cruelty because she promises to delay Maegor-type cruelty to the man who raped Eroe twice and then killed her. She does this because she feels extremely frustrated and heartbroken over this situation. Whether Hills Alive made a genuine mistake or if it was intentionally misleading is irrelevant. When I see incorrect information and I see someone with a pattern of not being entirely honest, then I will assume them to be liars. This was not something that was particularly difficult to fact-check either. All you need is a PDF copy and a search of the word Maegor. As someone with a reasonably sized platform, Hills Alive should know better. And she should include quotes, like I do.
In fact, I think Phoenix Ashes does a pretty terrible job of criticizing Hills Alive and her content. It seems to me that Hills Alive has her own interpretation of Daenerys that Phoenix Ashes thinks is wrong, but not only that, it's an interpretation Hills isn't allowed to have or share, and she should just shut up. No, seriously, that's the entire tone of the video. If I had to summarize the video in one sentence for those of you out there who haven't seen it and don't want to watch it, it would be this. The Targaryens never did anything wrong, especially Daenerys, and never criticized them, ever. Don't you dare do it.
This is a very dishonest way to portray it, but I will admit it, yes. I am not the type of person to believe in this wishy-washy everyone is allowed to interpret the character's story events however they want. Or rather, I only believe that they are allowed to do it if they make a strong case based on textual evidence, instead of doing the worst fate reading of the text, bending it to your whim, omitting key events that completely change the reading, etc. I believe that this image alone set media literacy back 100 years, and I want to strangle whoever made it.
To be clear, this video of mine is not a defense of Hills Alive and her content. This is not me debunking the Phoenix Ashes video. Well, at least not the entire thing. Just one small part. I wanted to do the whole thing, and I could do the whole thing because there were a lot of problems with the video. However, there is one part that stood out to me as decidedly wrong. In defense of Daenerys, Phoenix Ashes made a statement that suggested to me they don't understand the levels of privilege in the various circles of power within the story.
We're on minute 5 and Kevin already admits defeat. By the way he made it seem on his channel and Patreon, I believe that this will be a genuine attempt at debunking the entire video about Hills Alive, but he says that there will only be a small segment dedicated to it. A bit of a false advertising here, but clickbait pays, especially if the intent here was to attract either your shared viewers or Hills Alive's viewers who are still salty about what happened. I mean, a grift is a grift, but now all I have to do is copy my older scripts, since I know anti-Dany arguments by heart at this point, having seen them every day for the last 9 years, ever since I picked up the books for the first time. Or you know what, since I don't like recording narration all that much, and I have a bit of a sore throat today, I will just copy segments from the videos with adding more comments and more book passages when necessary.
You see, Phoenix Ashes claimed Dany, as Khaleesi, had no power, because she had no power, no agency of her own, she did not and could not own slaves. This is blatantly wrong. So here we go. Preamble over with. I would like to discuss Daenerys Targaryen's role as Khaleesi of the Writing Men. Was this a position of power among the Khalasar, or was Dany merely a prisoner with no agency of her own? Call this the Khaleesi and the Queen, power and privilege among the Dothraki. To go forward with the discussion, we must go back to Phoenix Ash's video. Around the 56-minute mark of their video, they include a clip of Hills Alive discussing the power dynamic between Mirri Maz Duur and Daenerys Targaryen. I need to share two clips for context. Here is the first one.
Now, it's easy to miss one of the key elements of this exchange, but it really feels like a vital insight into Dany's perspective at this moment. Dany begs Mirri to save Drogo and offers Mirri her freedom if she does so successfully. To be clear, Mirri Maz Duur is a middle-aged woman who was free up until a few days ago, and unless she failed to mention it, she has never been a slave before. She was enslaved and brutally, repeatedly as a captive, specifically in service of Dany's quest for the Iron Throne, and that is a price that Dany was actively willing to let others pay for her benefit. As she sees the horror of the sacking around her, she literally thinks to herself, "This is war. This is what it looks like. This is the price of the Iron Throne."
Now, you at the very least actually cite the books to back your claims. That is a progress. Except you intentionally leave out whatever may make your claim not hold up. May I remind you, Daenerys is at this point a naive, 14-year-old bridal slave who at first tries to rationalize the violence around her, but as soon as she witnesses too much, she puts an end to it as best as she can in the position that she is in. Is it a coincidence that Kevin needed to cut the part of this segment where I point out that Hills Alive omitted the part of the books where Dany decides to stop the rape? Because that is the clip without cutting.
Now, it's easy to miss one of the key elements of this exchange, but it really feels like a vital insight into Dany's perspective at this moment. Dany begs Mirri to save Drogo and offers Mirri her freedom if she does so successfully. To be clear, Mirri Maz Duur is a middle-aged woman who was free up until a few days ago, and unless she failed to mention it, she has never been a slave before. She was enslaved and brutally, repeatedly raped as a captive, specifically in service of Dany's quest for the Iron Throne, and that is a price that Dany was actively willing to let others pay for her benefit. As she sees the horror of the sacking around her, she literally thinks to herself, "This is war. This is what it looks like. This is the price of the Iron Throne."
Now, you at the very least actually cite the books to back your claims. That is a progress. Except you intentionally leave out whatever may make your claim not hold up. May I remind you, Daenerys is at this point a naive, 14-year-old bridal slave who at first tries to rationalize the violence around her, but as soon as she witnesses too much, she puts an end to it as best as she can in the position that she is in. Like 5 lines later. She wanted to cry, but she told herself that she must be strong. This is war. This is what it looks like. This is the price for the Iron Throne. I've told the Khal he ought to make for Meereen, Ser Jorah said. They will pay a better price than he would get from a slaving caravan. Illyria writes that they had a plague last year, so the brothers are paying double for healthy young girls and triple for boys under 10. If enough children survive the journey, the god will buy us all the ships we need and hire men to sail them. Behind them, the girl being raped made a heart-rending sound, a long sobbing wail that went on and on and on. Dany's hand clenched hard around the reins, and she turned the Silver's head. "Make them stop," she commanded Ser Jorah. "Khaleesi?" The knight sounded perplexed. "You heard my words," she said. "Stop them." She spoke to her Khas in the harsh accent of Dothraki. "Jogo Quaro, you will aid Ser Jorah. I want no rape." It's one of the lies of omission Kevin supposedly didn't catch. Maybe it got lost in the editing mania. Who knows? Again, if you hadn't already noticed, this is a 14-year-old pregnant bridal slave who knows full well that all her power derives from Drogo, and without Drogo, she is at the complete mercy of the Khalasar. At that point, not only Dany's life depends on it, but also the lives of the women she claimed in order to save them from further suffering. You know, the ones you call the slaves of this 14-year-old bridal slave. And wouldn't you know, once Drogo dies, and the power struggle begins in the Khalasar, only Jorah's protection is what saves Dany from death.
Hills Alive calls Daenerys a slave master, in particular, Miri's master, and Phoenix Ashes takes issue with that. This will be the basis for most of my own video. Oh, and if you're wondering why Hills Alive video is sped up, it's because Phoenix Ashes implied they couldn't bear listening to Hills at regular speed. There's a lot of personal insults thrown about the video. It's kind of wild.
If you want to trade insults, sure, but we advise that I bite back, and it won't be pretty.
Anyhow, now on to clip number 2.
Miri Mazdor was a free woman who suffered horrendously while being forced into subjugation, and her master has agreed to free her if and only if she saves the man who led the destruction of her entire community. In order to get back what she already had, she has to serve the two people who were the entire driving force behind her slavery and suffering in the first place.
You call Daenerys Miri's master, even though she herself is still a 14-year-old pregnant bridal slave, and all the power that she has, she gets from pleasing her husband sexually. Yet you insist on positioning a slave child bride as an equal master to Drogo, something that you would never do if this was about some other child bride that you selectively care about because she fits more into your ideas of proper womanhood. And because it fits your general narrative, you will call a pregnant 14-year-old bridal slave who was sold in order to be a slave master.
Okay, so there's the context. Now, one quick correction before we get too deep into things. Phoenix Ashes says only Jorah's protection is what saves Dany from death after Drogo's Khalasar falls apart. That's not true. Dany has protection from the men of her cause. She is Khaleesi after all. These little errors run rampant through the call-out video, which is one reason that kept me watching. But let's move on.
Why move on? Please, why don't you expand on this? This seems like what may be a strong argument, but it won't be because, as I said after watching a few seconds of the video, his entire gimmick will be picking apart my words to make me seem unreliable. This in no way changes the meritum of the argument. The Dothraki immediately become hostile after Dany begs Miri to save Drogo's life, and there is no saying whether the men of her caste will turn against her because all Dothraki generally fear and hate magic. Her only solid ally in this situation is Jorah, who personally guards her during the carnage and even gets disfigured in the process. Why does Kevin want to move on rather than show the passage that supposedly epically owns me? Let's look at it, friends. I would usually cut some irrelevant passages that I feel do not modify the story too much, but this time let's quote the entire passage, so that Kevin can be 100% sure that there are no lies by omission. Dany saw naked fear on the faces of the Dothraki. This must not be, Koto thundered. She had not seen the Blood Rider return. Hago and Kohollo were with him. They had brought the hairless man, the eunuchs who healed with knife and needle and fire. This will be, Dany replied. Maggie, Hago growled. And old Kohollo, Kohollo who had bound his life to Drogo's on the day of his birth, Kohollo who had always been kind to her. Kohollo spat full in her face. You will die, Maggie, Koto promised. But the other must die first. He drew his arak and made for the tent. No, she shouted. You mustn't. She caught him by the shoulder, but Koto shoved her aside. Dany fell to her knees, crossing her arms over her belly to protect the child with him. Stop him, she commanded her cuss. Kill him. Rakaro and Karo stood beside the tent flap. Karo took a step forward, reaching for the handle of his whip. But Koto spun graceful as a dancer, the curved arak rising. It caught Quoro low under the arm. The bright sharp steel beating up through leather and skin, through muscle and rib bone. Blood fountained as the young rider reeled backward, gasping. Koto wrenched the blade free. Horse Lord, said Jorah called. Try me. His long sword slid from its scabbard. Koto whirled, cursing. The arak moved so fast that Quero's blood flew from it in a fine spray, like rain in a hot wind. The longsword caught in a foot from Ser Jorah's face, and held it quivering for an instant as Koto howled in fury. The knight was clad in chainmail, with gauntlets and greaves of lobstered steel and heavy gorge around his throat, but he had not thought to don his helm. Koto danced backward, Arak whirling around his head in a shining blur, flickering out like lightning as the knight came out in a rush. Ser Jorah parried as best he could, but the slashes came so fast that it seemed to Dany that Koto had 4 Araks and as many arms. She heard the crunch of sword on mail, saw sparks fly as long curved blade glanced off a gauntlet. Suddenly it was Mormont stumbling backward, and Koto leaping in the attack. The left side of the knight's face ran red with blood, and a cut to the hip opened a gash in his mail and left him limping. Koto screamed taunts at him, calling him a craven, a milkman, a eunuch in an iron suit. "You die now," he promised, Arak shivering through the red twilight. Inside Dany's womb, her son kicked wildly. The curved blade slipped past the straight one and bit deep into the knight's hip, where the mail gaped open. Mormont grunted, stumbled. Dany felt a sharp pain in her belly, a wetness on her tights. Koto shrieked triumph, but his Arak had found bone, and for half a heartbeat it caught. It was enough. Ser Jorah brought his longsword down, with all the strength left him, through flesh and muscle and bone, and Koto's forearm dangled loose, flopping on a thin cord of skin and sinew. The knight's next cut was at the Dothraki's ear, so savage that Koto's face seemed almost to explode. The Dothraki were shouting. Mirri Maz Duur was wailing inside the tent like nothing human. Quarro pleading for water as he died. Dany cried out for help, but no one heard. Rakara was fighting Hago, Arak dancing with Arak until Drogo's whip cracked, loud as thunder, the lash coiling around Hago's throat. A young and the Blood Rider stumbled backward, losing his feet and his sword. Rakara sprang forward, howling, swinging his Arak down with both hands through the top of Hago's head. The point caught between his eyes, red and quivering. Someone threw a stone, and when Dany looked, her shoulder was torn and bloody. "No," she wept, "no, please stop it, it's too high, the price is too high." More stones came flying. She tried to crawl toward the tent, but Koholo caught her. Fingers in her hair, he pulled her head back, and she felt the cold touch of the knife at her throat. "My baby," she screamed, and perhaps the gods heard, for as quick as that, Koholo was dead. Ago's arrow took him under the arm to pierce his lungs and heart. When at last Daenerys found the strength to raise her head, she saw the crowd dispersing, the Dothraki stealing silently back to their tents and sleeping mats. Some were saddling horses and riding off. The sun had set. Fires burned throughout the Kalasar, great orange blazes that cracked with fury and spit embers at the sky. She tried to rise, and agony seized her and squeezed her like a giant's fist. The breath went out of her. It was all she could do to gasp. The sound of Mirri Maz Duur's voice was like a funeral dirge. Inside the tent, the shadows whirled. An arm went under her waist, and then Ser Jorah was lifting her off her feet. His face was sticky with blood, and Dany saw that half his ear was gone. She convulsed in his arms as the pain took her again, and heard the knight shouting for her handmaids to help him. "Are they also afraid?" She knew the answer. Another pain grasped her, and Dany beat back a scream. It felt as if her son had a knife in each hand, as if he were hacking at her to cut his way out. "Doria, curse you!" Ser Jorah roared. "Come here, fetch the birthing women." "They will not come. They say she is accursed." "They will come, or I will have their heads." Doria wept. "They are gone, my lord." "The Maegi," someone else said. Was that Ago? "Take her to the Maegi." "No," Dany wanted to say. "No, not that, you mustn't." But when she opened her mouth, a long wail of pain escaped, and the sweat broke over her skin. What was wrong with them? Couldn't they see? Inside the tent, the shapes were dancing, circling the brazier and the bloody bath, dark against the sunsilk, and some did not look human. She glimpsed the shadow of a grey wolf, and another like a man, red thin flames. "The lamb woman knows the secrets of the birthing bed," Irri said. "She said so, I heard her." "Yes," Doria agreed, "I heard her too." "No," she shouted, or perhaps she only thought it, for no whisper of sound escaped her lips. She was being carried, her eyes opened to gaze up at the flat dead sky, black and bleak and starless. "Please no." The sound of Mirri Maz Duur's voice grew louder, until it filled the world. "The shapes," she screamed. "The dancers." Ser Jorah carried her inside the tent. Admittedly, I myself did not have the best memory regarding this scene, so you can very clearly see that she directs her cast to stop Koto and Koholo from entering the tent, just like Mirri instructed. Ago saved Dany from Koholo. So Dany How many? 3 more protectors than I initially said? That is not a lot against potentially all of the warriors in Drogo's Kalasar, no? Or even regular Dothraki who were throwing stones at her. But like I said, this does not in any way change the argument that I made, that the Dothraki immediately became hostile to Dany when they noticed her engaging in magic, and afterwards even the midwives refused to assist her. In fact, they were hostile to her even before she asked for Miri's help. Koto's lips skinned back from his crooked brown teeth in a terrible mockery of a smile. No, you say me no? Better you should pray that we do not stake you out beside your Maegi. You did this as much as the other. Ser Jorah stepped between them, loosening his longsword in its scabbard. Rein in your tongue, Blood Rider. The princess is still your Khaleesi. Only while the blood of my blood still lives, Koto told enough. When he dies, she is nothing. Dany felt a tightness inside her. Before I was Khaleesi, I was the blood of the dragon. Ser Jorah, summon my Khas. No, said Koto. We will go. For now. Khaleesi. Hago followed him from the tent, scowling. That one means you no good, princess, Mormont said. The Dothraki say a man and his blood riders share one life, and Koto sees it ending. A dead man is beyond fear. And we learn what happens once the Kalasar leaves and once Dany wakes up. Which is exactly what I said. Without Dany's protection, Eroy is gang-raped and slaughtered, for which Dany feels guilty even 2 years later in a dance with dragons. Eroy, asked Dany, remembering the frightened child she had saved outside the city of the Lampmen. Mago seized her, who is called Jacko's blood rider now, said Jogo. He mounted her high and low and gave her to his call, and Jacko gave her to his other blood riders. They were 6. When they were done with her, they cut her throat. It was her fate, Khaleesi, said Ago. If I look back, I am lost. The Shave disagreed. If you had taken the unsullied south to Hazad, the sons of the Harpy, I know, it is Iroe all over again. Brown Ben Plum was puzzled. Who is Iroe? A girl I thought I'd saved from rape and torment. All I did was make it worse for her in the end. And all I did in Astapor was make 10,000 Iroes. Your Grace could not have known. I am the Queen. It was my place to know. Now a question for you. Find me a character, any character, who feels as responsible for someone's death as Dany still feels for Iroe 2 years afterwards. Leave it in the comments.
Hills Alive stated Daenerys was a slave master, the master of Mary Mazdor and the other women she took into her care from the Lazarine village. Phoenix Ashes disagreed, implying that Dany as Khaleesi did not have the same power that Drogo did as Khal. She was a 14-year-old bridal sex slave. She was no one's slave master. This, of course, is not true. For starters, no one is claiming that Daenerys as Khaleesi has the same power as Drogo the Khal. But that doesn't mean a Khaleesi cannot possess slaves like a Khal does. Mary and the other girls from the Lazarine village Dany took into her personal protection were her slaves. The text tells us this. Quote, the girl was trembling, her eyes wide and vague. Her hair was matted with blood. Doria, see to her hurts. You do not have a rider's look. Perhaps she will not fear you. The rest with me. She urged the silver through the broken wooden gate. It was worse inside the town. Many of the houses were afire, and the Jacqueron had been about their grisly work. Headless corpses filled the narrow, twisty lanes. They passed other women being each time Dany reined up, sent her cause to make an end to it, and claimed the victim as slave. One of them, a thick-bodied, flat-nosed woman of 40 years, blessed Dany haltingly in the common tongue, but from the others she got only flat, black stares. They were suspicious of her, she realized with sadness, afraid that she had saved them for some worse fate. You cannot claim them all, child, Ser Jorah said, the 4th time they stopped, while the warriors of her cause herded her new slaves behind her. I am Khaleesi, heir to the 7 kingdoms, the blood of the dragon, Dany reminded him. It is not for you to tell me what I cannot do. Across the city, a building collapsed in a great gout of fire and smoke, and she heard distant screams and the wailing of frightened children. End quote. Daenerys has no intention of treating these women as you would expect slaves to be treated, But they are her slaves. They belong to her. The Lazarene women most certainly see themselves as slaves. Dany might be saving them from, or worse, but the fact is they are no longer in control of their own lives. They are the spoils of war. They are at the mercy of someone else. Whether their master is benevolent or malevolent, it does not matter. They have been uprooted from their lives to be marched off toward some unknown purpose. When she says the rest with me, they are under her command. She is their owner, their master. Period. End of video. What I find to be odd is that there is more care and concern placed on how Dany feels, what's her interpretation of these events, than how these women feel about the ordeal they are now going through. They are victims, and Dany says she can see in their eyes they do not trust her, that perhaps they're afraid she has saved them for some worse fate. The text tells us that their expressions make her feel bad because she's not here to harm these women, but you have to ask yourself, so what? Again, why is there more care and consideration into how she feels in this moment than there is for how the women feel? They are the newly enslaved, and if they were worried they were being saved for some worse fate, they were not wrong. If Drogo doesn't decide to sell them to some passing slave caravan, they're being marched to Slaver's Bay. Because Daenerys is not advocating for their freedom, she's advocating for them to be treated peacefully on the road to Slaver's Bay. Dany's war in Westeros would be funded with gold from slavery. Because that's the whole point of this, to raid villages to acquire goods and then slaves to sell for the purposes of getting gold to hire ships to sail to Westeros to conquer. And once again, Daenerys is not advocating for these women to be freed. What she wants is for them to be treated kindly before they get dropped off to a slaving caravan or some slavers in Slaver's Bay, where all the things she tried to protect them from will happen anyway, and she will profit from that. At best, you will say she indirectly profits from this, because this was Drogo's war. Dany wanted it, but it was ultimately Drogo that initiated this war. And the best thing Dany can do when she sees the horrors of war, when she sees the price that must be paid for the Iron Throne, what she says is, please don't hurt these women on the road to Slaver's Bay. Let's be nice to our chattel before we hand them over to the abattoir.
So we are back to arguing pragmatics here. Kevin seems to be under the impression that while Dany is not equal to Drogo, she still has enough power to be in earnest called a slave owner. Even though, like I keep arguing, her position is not strong enough for there to be a possibility of such a dynamic. Dany, arguably, as Drogo's wife's slave, is higher in the hierarchy than the Lazarene women, but that does not take away from the fact that she is still a slave. Was it her conscious decision to marry Drogo and become his Khaleesi? Can she refuse him sex? Is she in a vulnerable position due to pregnancy and age on top of all that? This is like saying that the concubines in the Ottoman harems were slave owners because they had slave servants, even though they themselves were enslaved women who were kidnapped from their homes and had exactly no choice in the matter. I'm sorry, Hurem, my Ukrainian queen, please cover your ears and do not listen to this slander. And my question is, what else should she do at this point? Free them? Is she in a position to do so? How would the Khalasar react if she announced that these are free women now? Because what she does here is already incredibly risky, and at some point even she fears that she went too far. This one is Mago, who writes in the cast of Kojako. He says the Khaleesi has taken his spoils, a daughter of the lambs who was his to mount. Khal Drogo's face was still and hard, but his black eyes were curious as they went to Dany. Tell me the truth of this, moon of my life, he commanded in Dothraki. Dany told him what she had done, in his own tongue, so the Khal would understand her better, her words simple and direct. When she was done, Drogo was frowning. This is the way of war. These women are our slaves now, to do with as we please. It pleases me to hold them safe, Dany said, wondering if she had dared too much. If your warriors would mount these women, let them take them gently and keep them for wives. Give them places in the Khalasar and let them bear your sons. Koto was ever the cruelest of the blood riders. It was he who laughed. Does the horse bred with the sheep? Something in his tone reminded her of Viserys. If it's entirely on Drogo to accept her decision, then does she have enough power to be in earnest called a slave owner? Let's remember the analogy I made to the Ottoman concubines. Hurrem, you can uncover your ears now. Because see, if Dany had enough power to actually own these women, then the violent Dothraki wouldn't have dared to touch them after she goes into labor and almost dies. But they get claimed all the same the moment they are not protected by her. I wonder if the name Iroe will ever get mentioned in this video, since Kevin is so concerned for these Lazarine women. I'm really curious. Moreover, if Dany is a slave owner or a slaver solely due to her proximity to Drogo, then I do want the same treatment extended to every single character who ever stepped foot in Essos.
And the best defense for this I can hear coming is that Daenerys is a child. She's 14. Leave her alone. And if that's your best defense, you can pack your things and go. There's the moon door. Because this child queen is in a position of great power and influence.
If age is not a defense in the case of Dany, then I do not want to hear age being utilized in the face of any other character. Let's stay consistent. By the way, I kept highlighting Dany's age not because children can't own slaves, but because she could reasonably not realize what conquest entails and, due to her age, cannot have any sort of power close to Drogo. But in any case, let's see Dany's great power as a child queen in action, shall we? Yet every night, sometime before the dawn, Drogo would come to her tent and wake her in the dark, to ride her as relentlessly as he rode his stallion. He always took her from behind, Dothraki fashion, for which Dany was grateful. That way her lord husband could not see the tears that wet her face, and she could use her pillow to muffle her cries of pain. When he was done, he would close his eyes and begin to snore softly, and Dany would lie beside him, her body bruised and sore, hurting too much for sleep. Day followed day, and night followed night, until Dany knew she could not endure a moment longer. She would kill herself rather than go on, she decided one night. Here we see that Dany is so powerful that her husband rapes her every night to the point that she is suicidal. But hey, you might argue that this is before she makes Drogo fall in love with her. Does that change after they are already a loving couple? No, because for one, Dany is 14! And Drogo is in his late 20s. A 14-year-old girl cannot consent to sex with someone who is of the same age as her, let alone a grown man. And before you use the go-to excuse, Dany is married off at an exceptionally young age, and this is noted even by Viserys and Illyrio. Are you sure that Khal Drogo likes his women this young? She had her blood. She is old enough for the Khal. Illyrio told them, not for the first time. Look at her. The silver gold hair, those purple eyes. She is the blood of old Valyria, no doubt. And highborn, daughter of the old king, sister to the new, she cannot fail to interest our Drogo. When he released her hand, Daenerys found herself trembling. I suppose, her brother said doubtfully, these savages have queer tastes. Boys, horses, sheep. Best not suggest this to Khal Drogo, Illyrio said. Westerosi age of adulthood is 16. Dany is 13 when she's married off to Drogo, and 14 when she is pregnant with his child. As I say, she cannot consent at this age. But even if she could, Drogo would not listen, as he is seen taking her whenever he pleases, even raping her publicly while she's pregnant. When she emerged from the lake, shivering and dripping, her handmaid Doria hurried to her with a robe of painted sunsilk, but Khal Drogo waved her away. He was looking on her swollen breast and the curve of her belly with approval, and Dany could see the shape of his manhood, pressing through his horsehide trousers, below the heavy gold medallions of his belt. She went to him and helped him unlace. Then her huge Khal took her by the hips and lifted her into the air, as he might lift a child. The bells in his hair rang softly. Dany wrapped her arms around his shoulders and pressed her face against his neck as he thrust himself inside her. 3 quick strokes and it was done. The stallion who mouthed the word, Drogo whispered hoarsely. His hands still smelled of horse blood. He beat at her throat hard, in the moment of his pleasure, and when he lifted her off, his teeth filled her and tricked down the inside of her tights. Only then was Doria permitted to drape her in the scented sunsilk, and nearly to fit soft slippers to her feet. Even before this, Drogo also only listens to Dany if she pleases him sexually. After the day in the grass, when she had left him to walk back to the Kalasar, the Dothraki had laughingly called him Khal Ra'emar, the Sorefoot King. Khal Drogo had offered him a place in a cart the very next day, and Viserys had accepted. In his stubborn ignorance, he had not even known he was being mocked. The cards were for eunuchs, cripples, women giving birth, the very young and the very old. That won him yet another name, Khal Ragad, the Card King. Her brother had thought it was the Khal's way of apologizing for the wrong Dany had done him. She had begged Ser Jorah not to tell him the truth, lest he be shamed. The knight had replied that the king could well do with a bit of shame. Yet he had done as she bid. It had taken much pleading, and all the pillow tricks Doria had taught her, before Dany had been able to make Drogo relent and allow Viserys to rejoin them at the head of the column. Pregnancy is making Dany tired, but that does not stop Drogo from raping her. Tell my sun and stars that I dream of him and wait anxious for his return, she replied. Thankful. Dany tired more easily as the child grew within her. In truth, a night of rest would be most welcome. Her pregnancy only seemed to have inflamed Drogo's desire for her, and of late, his embraces left her exhausted. So can we finally settle it, once and for all? Yes, I know that George R.R. Martin romanticizes this relationship, as he tends to romanticize them and many others. But do you guys really need to have everything spelled out to you? Does anyone have to break the fourth wall and say, yes, this is sex slavery? Are these passages not enough? Or are these passages not enough? The girl slid the gilded sandals onto her feet, while the old woman fixed the tiara in her hair, and slid golden braces crusted with amethysts around her wrists. Last of all came the collar, a heavy golden tor emblazoned with ancient Valyrian glyphs. Now you look all a princess, the girl said breathlessly when they were done. Dany glanced at her image in the silvered looking glass that Illyrio had so thoughtfully provided. A princess, she thought. But she remembered what the girl had said. How Khal Drogo was so rich, even his slaves wore golden collars. The exile had offered her brother his sword the night Dany had been sold to Khal Drogo. Viserys had accepted eagerly. It was truly a magnificent gift, though she knew that Illyrio could afford to be lavish. He had collected a fortune in horses and slaves for his part in selling her to Khal Drogo. So, is she a child queen or is she a slave? I just noticed that this script is already 11 pages long and we're on minute 16. That coupled with his clips and the pre-investigation part will make this video very long already, so end of part 1. I'm already tired of this. All of this I already discussed numerous times in detail before. And I already had to deal with people downplaying the sheer scale of sexual violence done to Daenerys in a Game of Thrones. And all white people insist that age cannot ever be used in defense of her. She is essentially treated as an adult woman by everyone and not an 8th grader bridal slave. But if you start shit, I will finish it. Part 2 drops in a week, and part 3 and perhaps even part 4 another week. Depends on how this script will turn out. I would also like to remind Kevin of the demand I made of him. It still stands until he relents. And now, remember that if you like my content, like, subscribe and share so that more people can see it. Make sure to click the notification button so that you never miss a new video.